Let's talk about energy storage. And I'm starting with this picture because it's not what people usually think about for energy storage. This is pumped hydro. So this is basically you need to have water up high and water down low that you can transfer back and forth. That's pumped hydro. And so a turbine is also can operate as a pump. It's just basically the other way. So if you put electricity into it, it'll pump the water up to the upper reservoir. And then when you want electricity, then you run the water back down to the lower reservoir. So we'll talk more about how pumped hydro in particular works. Today we're going to be talking really about energy storage broadly and how it fits into the grid and why we need it and what services it can provide to our grid for reliability. Okay, so why do we need energy storage? So energy storage is this way of being able to decouple when we're producing electricity and when we're demanding it. Right? That gives us lots of flexibility in being able to match supply and demand in real time. So this is just showing that pictorially, right? We saw this a lot with Zach. You can charge it when electricity demand is low, and then you can use it when electricity demand is high. But I just wanted to remind you that you're charging it and then you're discharging it, but you have losses. Whenever you're doing storage, you have losses. So if you were thinking about trying to do something the most efficient, you would want to just demand and supply to match each other. But from a cost perspective and economic perspective, it can make sense to have energy storage in terms of being able to decouple those and provide reliable electricity service. But you are having losses. You're losing electricity production by putting it into storage. Something that's really important to think about in terms of our electricity is its capacity and its energy. So the power it can provide and how much energy it's storing. And so this is just a way of thinking about that. So you have to think about both the power, which is kind of the flow rate of energy that it's able to provide. So how much power can it provide? And how much energy, that's like the capacity. So this is just using water tanks as an example. You can have basically a 4-hour discharge if you're discharging at a power of 1 liter per hour and you have 4 liters, right? Or you can have 12-hour discharge if you're doing it at the same power with 12 liters, or you can have a 4-hour discharge that's a much higher power, right? And so when we're talking about energy storage and when you look at projects, you should look at both the gigawatt or megawatt, the capacity, and the gigawatt hours or the megawatt hours that it's able to provide. Both of those things are important. And those two things together will give you what the duration of that energy storage is. How long will it be able to provide energy at that rate? So why do we need energy storage? I think we've talked about a lot of these, so I'm going to fly through these a little bit. But it's, to integrate the renewables that are variable resources because we have a lot of congestion. So we're able to put batteries in places that are able to relieve some of that congestion, and you can actually avoid some upgrades to transmission and distribution. So economically, that can be great. We have a lot more fragile grid. We have a lot more strains on our grid. And so storage can really help us with reliability. And then, of course, serving AI load growth quickly is one of the services energy storage can provide. Duck curve is one of the big ones. This is in California. Being able to both help, energy storage can help with the ramping needs, and it can make use of free electricity here and sell it in the evening, right? And we're seeing that in California where we're charging batteries in the middle of the day with solar, selling it at night when we need that electricity. We also have variability just in our resources, which batteries or energy storage can help with, and frequency regulation. So this is one of the ancillary services. This is just to give you a sense that, think of this as your demand curve, the black line. But what really happens is there's a lot of variability in that frequency. And remember, Simon was like, oh my gosh, I'm 0.2 off of my 50 hertz. I got to do something quickly. The frequency has to be at very tight controls. And so energy storage can help provide some of this up and down a little bit. There's other services that can also provide that, but that's also another market they can participate in and get paid for that frequency regulation. Okay, and then with a more congested grid, if we want to defer upgrades, energy storage can help us with that, which basically says, if that's our load carrying capacity of some segment of the grid and you're able to put energy storage there, you're able to basically peak shave and keep below your grid transmission capacity limits. And so this is something batteries in particular are very good at, because we can put them in small locations. You can put them in cities, you can put them right next to the transmission distribution, unlike that pump storage, which needs large infrastructure, right? And so that can defer, this can happen at both transmission and distribution side of things. What we see on the distribution side of things, so that's our residential customers, with our increase in demand in our towns and our cities and our neighborhoods, especially with things like electric vehicles, it's a lot more demand of electricity than the distribution system was designed for. But you can put storage around some of the infrastructure to help ease the power draw that is being demanded from things like electric vehicles or something on the grid. And that can be more cost effective than actually doing the distribution system upgrades. We see a more fragile grid, so we've gone over this in terms of climate outages and weather-related outages. And we're seeing, electricity interruptions increase, especially with major events. So US average is somewhere around 11 hours of annual electricity power interruptions, but you can see there's a lot of variability. And so storage can also help us with that reliability. And finally, the last category I mentioned was serving AI growth. Because battery systems can be installed quickly, they can help serve that power need and that reliability need that these data centers need. So I'm just highlighting here, I think, this is kind of a unique one where Redwood Materials is providing second life batteries for Crusoe AI. They kind of did a small project, like a little 12 megawatt project, to just try it out and had a lot of success. So now they're going to increase that capacity 7 times. So energy storage is able to kind of help with some of the challenges with these new demand centers. And energy storage can help in all sorts of all of those different markets we've just talked about. Everything from the utility side to the grid side to the consumer side. And so we're going to talk through some of these different services energy storage can provide depending on how it's designed and where it's placed. It's going to participate in different markets and at different market prices. This is just kind of a list of some of the use cases for batteries. What these 2 categories are basically utility scale, so that's front of the meter. Remember, anything that's front of the meter, FTM, is utility side of the meter. And behind the meter, this would be the residential, commercial, or industrial side. So these are the customer side of the grid. And we'll talk through some of these, but I thought this was just good. You can refer back to this list to remind yourself of the different use cases and different markets that batteries can really participate in. And like I said, they kind of have to revenue stack and participate in multiple ones, especially on the utility side, to be able to compete on the market in all these different timescales. One of the things that batteries are really good at are ramping up and down really quickly. Pumped hydro is similar. It's not quite as fast as a battery, but it's pretty similar. What I'm comparing it to is these are our gas turbines. This light gray line, this is our gas turbines and how fast they can ramp up and down. Pumped hydro is pretty similar to this one in terms of being able to provide that kind of like 5-minute demand. These are our combined cycle gas turbines, so a lot more efficient, remember, but a little bit slower to really ramp up to full capacity. And then coal and nuclear take a long time to get up to significant capacity. And those can depend on whether they call it a cold start or a warm start. Starting from a cold start, both coal and nuclear are going to take hours to days. They got to warm up. If they're warm, they can do a little bit. They can flex up and down a little bit in terms of our thermal power plants. Okay, and then another aspect that is important to keep in mind when we're talking about energy storage is duration. And we're going to talk a lot about duration. And what does it mean? So you'll hear short-term duration, long-term duration, seasonal storage. Those are kind of the categories, although sometimes long duration and seasonal are kind of lumped together. Depends, so you got to kind of look at the details. Short duration, what we're usually talking about is 4 hours, at least 4 hours of energy storage based on what your power draw requirements are and your energy storage. So short-term storage on the utility side is usually 4 hours and is used a lot for day-to-day variation, right? So sunshine in the middle of the day, selling in the evening, sunshine in the middle of the day. It's doing that every day, right? And so that's like 4 hour duration storage. Long duration storage, this is getting to some of those challenges that Zach was really talking about with what if you have a whole week that doesn't have any sunshine? Long duration storage would be able to store up electricity when that sunshine is excess, and it would wait for that week to be able to provide, 100 hours of duration of energy storage. So long duration tends to be like 8 to 100 hours is kind of what we're talking about. Seasonal, you can see this is like monthly. So seasonal would be, is there some way that we would be storing it during the summer when we have a bunch of excess solar, and then we would sell it in the winter? You can probably get a sense that from a market standpoint, these are harder. Because here, when the short-term storage, you're storing it and you're getting money back. And you're storing it, you're paying for it, and you're getting money back. And so you're getting money back every day. Store, sell, store, sell, store, sell. If you're having to store it, even if you're storing it at a low price and then it's sitting there and waiting for this week when it's needed, it's much harder to make back your capital. And so a lot of times these long-term and then especially seasonal, you have to really look at low-cost options, because you're only going to demand it, once a year, twice a year, something like that. Okay, yeah.
Does long-term storage mean weeks, months, or years?
Yeah, it's monthly storage. So it truly is taking, like I said, summer sunshine and then discharging it in the winter. Now that discharge, so this is where long duration and seasonal can kind of get, that discharge might be over 100 hours, but it's waiting, it can wait, whatever the storage option can wait months before discharging that electricity. Yeah.
Is the battery chemistry different between long-term and short-term storage?
Yeah, and we'll talk about that. And batteries aren't the only option. So when we're talking about energy storage, it's not just batteries. And so some of these long duration storage options, I think one of the ones that's easy to think about intuitively, which I don't know that anybody's doing it, but it's a thought exercise, is hydrogen. So if you think about if you had summer sunshine and you had a tiny little electrolyzer and it was just making hydrogen and putting it in storage all throughout the summer. And you're building up hydrogen into a tank. And then when you needed it in the winter, you could quickly discharge it, right? So things like that, but you really have to have pretty low upfront costs, which I'll show some curves later, for these long duration, at least how our markets are set up right now in terms of valuing that storage where it's not providing any service while it's storing. Yeah, there's a question.
In states where they rely heavily on fossil fuels, do they charge batteries with clean sources?
Yeah, it's a great question. So so first I will say energy storage can store anything, right? And so it is not only helping, even in California, it's not only helping to take advantage of the excess solar, but it's also helping the nuclear power plant actually sell its electricity, right? And so it's because it's just staying on and running. And so the energy storage provides that flexibility no matter what the resources are. What we don't see, because the fossil fuel infrastructure and the nuclear are more expensive on a marginal cost, you don't get the same energy arbitrage as you do with something that's zero marginal cost like wind and solar. And so the advantage to the storage is less. And so it's much harder to make that case for energy arbitrage anyway for cost. So yes, we see energy storage for places that have very fossil fuel heavy or nuclear heavy for reliability reasons or other reasons or transmission distribution deferral, but you're not going to get that same benefit for energy arbitrage as you see from wind and solar. Yeah, great question. Okay, and this is just another way of looking at something that Zach talked about. This is showing as you're adding utility scale wind, solar, and hydro, you're really covering spring and some of summer really well, but you add more and more and more, you just get excess here, and it's really hard to get it all year round. And so this is just kind of the motivator in thinking about seasonal storage if we want to decarbonize our grid. So next, we're going to talk about the different technologies. So there are lots of different ways, I said, to store energy. There's mechanical ways, electrochemical. So these are our battery systems, thermal, electrical, chemical. There's all sorts of different ways to store energy. We're mostly going to be talking about pumped hydro, which is highlighted there, and battery energy storage systems here because those are the dominant ones on our system. So a lot of those, the other options are definitely interesting, but they are more niche right now. A lot of times, we just talked about power versus time or energy. A lot of times you'll see charts like this. I don't want you to focus too much on a chart like this because it's a little misleading. And you'll see all sorts of different ones. These suggest that duration is determined by technology, and it's really not. It's determined by economics. So you could have a lithium-ion battery, you could fill it up today, and you could wait 3 weeks and then use it. It's not inherent to the technology that we use lithium-ion batteries for short duration storage. It's just not economic to do so. It's much more economic to use it every day. Okay, so we kind of steer away from looking at it in this sense and really thinking about that duration is really not typically really a fundamental property. It's really about the economics that makes sense in the markets that it's participating in. What does the energy landscape look like globally? This is a snapshot. You can see it's about half pumped hydro and half lithium-ion batteries, basically, in terms of grid energy storage. This is just grid energy storage. When I sat in your seat and I took this class, which was way before 2018, we were saying, oh, it's all pumped hydro. It's been pumped hydro and almost all pumped hydro for a long time. And you can see that there isn't a lot of growth in pumped hydro. All of the growth is really happening in electrochemical, but really lithium-ion batteries in terms of grid storage. And that's true both looking at capacity and energy. So this is just looking at the US market. From a capacity standpoint, you can see that growth in lithium-ion. So that's thinking about capacity or power. In terms of energy storage, we're still getting a lot of the energy from our pumped hydro with this kind of growing segment from batteries. Okay, so again, this is like the energy that we're getting out of those energy storage systems. But still, this is where we're seeing the growth. We're not seeing pumped hydro. There's not really big projects recommended or in progress in the US. Cost is a big driver of this. This is just one look. So that we're back to looking at levelized cost of electricity. And you can see how that battery storage has really come down over time. So that's a big deal in terms of driving the costs down for energy storage on the grid. And in terms of where we're seeing grid scale energy storage systems, no surprise probably to anybody, China is the biggest, followed by the United States and then Europe in terms of areas that are putting on grid scale battery storage. So this is kind of that growth piece of our energy storage system. And so looking at it just in terms of this is the capacity that we're adding every year to our grid in the United States, you can see that the battery is a significant portion of the capacity we're adding. I like this chart to be thinking about like how big a deal is the amount of batteries we're putting on the grid compared to things like the solar and wind that we're adding. So this was 2024. But I also don't like these kind of grids because it's kind of a mixed thing. These ones are producing electricity, this one's storing it, right? And so it's not saying that this would not be the amount of capacity we need. It's like this minus the battery storage is the capacity we're needing. Yeah.
Do they go together geographically, seeing as how wind and solar are variable sources depending on the location?
We see both. And it depends on what the market's energy storage. Energy storage can be all over the place. But we are seeing where solar or wind might pair with batteries because solar plus 4 hours of batteries or wind plus 4 hours of batteries is still our lowest cost on the grid, but they can provide a much more even supply. And so we definitely see batteries going in co-located with the solar and wind. That's a benefit just in being able to sell the idea of the project, but it's also a benefit in terms of using the capacity of the transmission to that site. If you think about it, especially with a solar farm, it's going to use it most in the middle of the day, and then it's not going to use it at all at night. Whereas batteries can really take advantage of that transmission capacity. It can shave off the top of the solar in the middle of the day. It can continue to use it at night. And so it's a way to be able to take advantage of capacity that may not be able to meet the max of the solar, if that makes sense. We also, we also see batteries going in on commercial, industrial, and behind the meter side of things, not just utility side, co-located with wind and solar. Okay, so the two places that we're seeing a lot of battery installations are in California. This is the light blue. So CAISO, and then ERCOT in this kind of red color. And then more and more just kind of in other markets, which may or may not have wholesale power markets. So this is showing you both the power capacity and the energy capacity in different areas in the US. Okay, so that's giving you a landscape, and I want to talk a little bit, I want you to kind of have the technology and know what people are talking about when they talk about battery energy storage systems, or BESS. Because BESS, you'll see that in media, you'll see it talked about. What does that mean? Okay, so you have some sort of battery cell. Those are going to look differently. Some of them just look like Teslas just look like, or Panasonics just look like AA's or AAA's. They're a little bit bigger. So that's kind of like a wrapped cathode. A battery is basically, you have an anode and a cathode with material in between it. And the battery, like a AA or AAA, is just like it's like a rolled anode cathode on itself. And then you have the positive and negative on either side, right? So that's your cell. And then often it's put into a module like this, where they're all connected together. And then those modules are put into a container. And so the container is like these modules are all stacked together inside that container. And then they have some sort of cooling system, and then of course like a fire retardant system, and then an electrical panel inside that container. That container, it's called the DC block. It's providing DC power. It's often going to something that is going to convert it to AC in order to be able to step it up and put it onto the grid, right? The battery energy storage equipment is usually considered all of this because it's what's required to actually put it onto the AC grid. And so when you're seeing costs, sometimes we're just talking about cell costs, sometimes we're talking about module costs, sometimes we're talking about the whole system. So you'll see variations on how it's being reported in the media. So this is just a picture. This is for a field trip that we took to Stanford Solar PV and Storage Facility in Lemoore. So this is to give you a sense of scale. We're standing down here as they're giving the tour. These are the battery storage containers. This is that equipment that's providing that DC to AC service. And then it's going over to another location where it's being stepped up to the voltage to be added onto the grid. Now, Stanford only owns a portion of these. Their power purchase agreement is just a portion of the PV panels and a portion of the battery. So at this site, there's actually multiple different meters before it goes onto the grid, so that each different off-taker can know how much their panels and their storage is providing to the grid. So there's actually separate meters at this facility. So what are prices that we're kind of seeing right now? I have both globally and US and China where it was available. But again, it depends on how it's reported in terms of cells, the DC block, all of the equipment. And then this is like turnkey, which means that's the engineering, procurement, and construction, like all costs. And so you can see costs tend to be less in China. They tend to be a little bit more in the United States. And you can kind of see what the global average is, but they're relatively low and they've come down a lot. But I wanted to put this in context, and that's kind of why I have my EV shirt on today. So you can see battery storage for the grid is that dark blue. We've seen that growth in it, but in terms of demand for lithium-ion batteries, it is in our vehicles. It's not in our portable electronics, not in our phones and our laptops. That's a much smaller part. The biggest market is in our vehicles. And this also is what drives down costs for the energy storage on the grid, where it's able to compete in those different markets. So just to give you a sense of scale. Okay, we're talking about lithium ion and batteries. It would be remiss not to talk about production of materials that go in to our lithium ion batteries. And so what this is showing is, where we're manufacturing batteries. This is by investment, not by capacity, but it still gives you a sense of who's building the batteries. So no surprise, China's been investing in this for a while and really scaled up battery manufacturing. We've seen increases in other places too. Battery manufacturing, this is including for both storage for the grid and for electric vehicles. And so the Inflation Reduction Act, which we've mentioned some, I won't go into it a whole lot, was really looking at growing the investment in domestic manufacturing for batteries. The Inflation Reduction Act went into act around 2022, kind of mid-2022, and you can kind of see the growth of investment we saw in manufacturing, especially for batteries domestically. A lot of those policies, incentives are still available-ish with some tweaks. So I've kind of put them here so you can kind of see what were the different categories. And the dark is basically the original IRA and what was planned for battery incentives and manufacturing. And then the orange is the modifications that have been made by the Trump administration. And so some of the controversy that has come around some of the incentives has been the portion of batteries that are made from foreign materials or foreign construction or foreign supply chain. And so some of those changes are, for example, the domestic content minimums for tax credits. Basically, you got a bump in your tax credit by 10% by meeting that domestic content minimum. But then they've really dramatically increased what that domestic content minimum is. So this year it's 70%. It has to be 100% domestic content by 2029 in order to take advantage of those tax credits. So you can imagine this is meant to try to drive more domestic production of these materials, but we don't have a lot of the materials available. Things like cobalt. We don't have the mining and we don't have the production facilities domestically. So that makes it really challenging to take advantage of those tax credits. I also wanted to get you a sense that we talk about lithium ion batteries as if they're all the same, but they're not all the same. And they're different in our phones than they are in our cars than they are in grid storage. There's tweaks to the battery chemistry, and there's reasons to do those tweaks. And there's tweaks around the world. So in the United States and the EU, we tend to use what's called, kind of nickel-based lithium-ion batteries. So nickel, manganese, cobalt, or the nickel, cobalt, aluminum, more the NMC. This is like what dominates in the US and the EU. And the reasons for that is these are higher energy density. So when we're worried about range in our electric vehicles, we tend to want these higher energy density. There's a higher from both a weight and a volume standpoint than what is really starting to dominate in China, which are these, lithium ion phosphate batteries. Tend to be lower energy density, but they're also a lot lower cost. And they also have some advanced ones that can charge a lot faster than the EV batteries that we have here in the US. I think that we're going to see these change. We're seeing Chinese EVs being sold kind of globally. So we're going to see changes in the mix, but it is not all the same. And some of this gets impacted by prices and shortages and things like that. When I talk to my recycling friends, they love to get cell phones for recycling for EV batteries because cell phones have a really high cobalt content in their batteries. So it's different, and it's different for different costs and different markets. Costs can vary a lot for some of these different materials. So I've just kind of given you a sense of, cobalt and lithium kind of stand out in terms of cost of some of the materials. And we want to talk about where these materials are being produced. So cobalt gets a lot of attention because 3/4 of it is produced in the Democratic Republic of Congo, with some very worrisome human health and social impacts in terms of that mining. And so a lot of attention in terms of cobalt and efforts to reduce the amount of cobalt in the lithium-ion batteries, if not find more sustainable places to mine that cobalt. China really dominates graphite. That's gotten a lot of attention. And then lithium, which there actually isn't a whole lot of lithium in our lithium-ion batteries, even though we talk about it. This has gone through some ups and downs in terms of production. The prices are actually pretty low, but you can see it's a lot more diverse in terms of production of lithium. Okay, and I want to talk about, so these chemistries are for different background applications, but we can mine for these materials and we can also recycle for these materials. You obviously can't recycle all the way to converting all of our vehicles to electric vehicles, right? We have to mine for the materials in the first place. But the great thing about batteries is that you can recover almost 100%, not quite, almost 100% of the metals that you're using in your batteries, and usually easier than you can from getting it from the mined ores. So this is going to just give you a sense of what is the content percentage of these different materials in the battery versus the ores that you're mining, and you can kind of get a sense that, well, it'd be easier to get it if it's 20% of the material rather than 1% of the material. So this is an important aspect of meeting our electricity, our energy storage needs, is recycling. And I would say kind of what Redwood Materials, and we talked about earlier, the ideal would be you use new batteries and EVs that really care about energy density from both a volume and a weight standpoint. Now that will degrade over time. I have a 2015 electric vehicle, and I've lost, I think my original range was 275 and my current range is like 262 or something. Nothing that matters to me, but you will lose range over time. So the best thing would be to use those old EV batteries that are no longer good enough for range, but still have a lot of storage capacity. You could use them on the grid where you don't really care about volume or weight on the grid. You can put lots, you could almost use lead acid. You can use less energy dense. You could still use them as second life batteries. They still have that ability to be used for storage. Then you can recycle it and recover the materials and make new batteries again for electric vehicles, right? And so this would be the full life cycle that you could do for your batteries for energy storage. Okay, so that's what's happening. Long duration storage is also getting attention. We've seen increase in investment. We've seen increase in installations, particularly in China, but I just want to stress this is from a really small amount. So lots of increase from a really small amount. There's a variety of different companies. This is from their founded year. So you can see there was kind of in the late 2015s and early 2020s, there's a lot of interest and founding of new long duration storage energy companies. We are seeing some of them have commercial installations, even here in the US. I saw Form Energy, for example, of one. So I've just kind of listed from the different technology perspectives, some of the companies that are out there. I always have to give a shout out to Renewal because this is a former TA of our class. Kemp Gregory and Stefan also took the class. Here they're using gravity energy storage in old oil wells. So if you think about it, it's a weight on a winch, and the winch is at the surface, and you can run the weight down the well when you want to produce electricity, and you can pull it up the well when you have excess electricity. So a pretty simple concept. We have a lot of abandoned and inoperable oil wells, so that's a lot of height that's underground that you can make use of. The other one I wanted to mention, because I did mention hydrogen as an energy storage, because I usually get asked about it and a lot of people talk about it. So just tried to give you a sense of the kind of the whole life cycle efficiency. So you can see lithium-ion batteries and pump storage, those are both pretty efficient in terms of losses of energy. If you're thinking about hydrogen, especially if you're thinking about green hydrogen, so this is just for green hydrogen, meaning you're making hydrogen from water. So you're using electricity to make the hydrogen from water. That's how you're storing the electricity, right? And you store it, and then you're using a fuel cell to make it back into electricity. It's a pretty inefficient system. So you have a lot of losses. And so this is one of the challenges with using something like hydrogen for seasonal storage and making that cost effective. I know we only have 5 minutes of class left, but I do want to, we've talked a lot about costs and wholesale prices. This is really about the stacking. So I mentioned that you can stack the different markets in order to get something cost effective for the different batteries. But what I thought this was a good visualization, and I have to credit Adrian Yao, who just got his PhD here on this. But in thinking about the revenue recovery, so you have like your capital costs, and then you recover your revenue over time. It's very different for something that's like a 4-hour lithium-ion battery, where you're able to do that energy arbitrage, versus something like the long duration storage. That's kind of like the green or the orange. So in order to really recover, because you're not using it as much, you're not getting that kind of daily payback, you really have to have kind of these lower capital costs. This little pink line, they're just picking on Moss Landing, which maybe you've heard about. There's a slide in the appendix if you want to look at it, that caught fire, and that they never really got to the revenue recovery phase before it caught fire. It's not, there is fire risk with lithium-ion batteries. It was a poor setup. It's not the way that we set up lithium-ion batteries anymore. So I would say it's not indicative of the risk associated with using lithium-ion batteries. It's indicative of poor design. Okay, and then quickly, I just want to talk about behind the meter. These are just Tesla Powerwires, but what does behind the meter markets look like? We've talked about how wholesale prices are somewhere around 3 to 6 cents a kilowatt hour, but our retail, commercial, industrial markets are much bigger. And so this is actually a place where energy storage is competing in a different price market because it's on the retail side rather than on the wholesale side. And for example, for our commercial and industrial users, they can also stack, revenue stack for storage behind the meter. Using things like demand response, they can, for this bill management, what that really means is their demand charge declines. So commercial and industrial customers are charged a demand charge, and that's based on the maximum power that they demand each month. So it's not the energy they use, it's what is the max capacity that they're demanding. So that's like a building or manufacturing or something, and they get an extra charge for that. And so batteries can shave that demand charge, which can be pretty significant, just by shaving off when they have that peak demand and making it a lower peak demand. So you can think about that. All of these things are things that they can stack and make it useful behind the meter. And then residents can do something similar. So this is where we've seen the residential storage. This is just looking at California. A lot of added capacity. There's been a lot of incentives for energy storage, but it's still a pretty small portion of the overall market. Vehicle to grid is something I think a lot of people have tried to make work, and they are making it work, like Kirsten's making it work with the buses, for example, the school buses that are sitting in the summer. They're serving as energy storage. The biggest challenge has been when people spend all this money on their electric car and their battery is the biggest piece of that, they don't want to degrade it by deep cycling it. And so it's not a technology problem, it's a value problem of how much faster are you degrading your battery if you're using it as storage on the grid, and are you able to recover those costs in a way that makes sense for a vehicle to grid? And so I think it just hasn't quite worked out. What does make sense is thinking about when you're charging your electric vehicle. Because I try to charge mine during the day when my solar is basically free. My electricity is basically free. But in terms of selling it back to the grid, I'm degrading my battery when I'm doing that with the batteries that we use. We're also seeing batteries come into appliances. And this is really just a way of deferring or avoiding the electricity upgrades that have to happen in most houses in order to have these electric appliances. So the battery can basically shave off the power draw of your induction stove or oven. And then you don't have to upgrade your electrical panel, right? And so we're seeing little batteries show up kind of in all these different places behind the meter. I know we're out of time, so you guys can look at the rest of this, but I did want to just show you, this is my electricity rate. And so this is when I'm trying to charge my car, and this is when I'm selling off of my batteries. And so as a consumer, I can take advantage of arbitrage even without solar, just by having batteries, right? I can fill my batteries here and I can sell it back to the grid because we have net energy metering. And so I do that. I also participate in a virtual power plant, which basically is providing more services to the grid and at very high costs. I actually get paid, I don't know if I put up here, I get paid like $2 a kilowatt hour as serving as grid backup as a virtual power plant. And so all of these fleet homes together are serving that energy storage. They're basically being put together to serve energy storage to the grid, and then we get compensated for it. Okay, that's it for today. If you want to learn more about this topic or other energy topics, visit our Stanford Understand Energy Learning Hub for free resources, including signing up for our monthly Energy Spotlight. Don't forget to subscribe to our YouTube channel and tap the notification bell to be notified for our newest content.